Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody. Thank you for tuning into another Supatease video. And the first debut of Midnight has arrived, and I must say, I think it's pretty spectacular and absolutely foundation altering, which was completely unexpected. I thought that we were kind of in a formulaic passive expansions. They were just going to control C, control V, and it was going to be more of the same. But instead, they're deciding to rip the floor out and relay an entirely new foundation for the house when it comes to the expansion in many regards, but especially with class design. So I'm going to be doing a series of videos reviewing all of the most significant class changes coming into Midnight up to this point. Do note that this is an alpha. These are likely highly subject to change, especially iterations on feedback, but it's showing that Blizzard is willing to take some significant risks with Midnight, which is going to have a consistent trend irregardless of the little nitty-gritty changes that they decide to do specifically. So in today's video, we are going to be reviewing the Unholy Deathknight, because there's quite literally an essay of changes, talent removals, and new additional powers that you're going to be looking forward to getting in the expansion Midnight, that I really just wanted to dedicate basically an entire video to it. And as always, if you want to make sure that you're staying up to date, you don't miss out on any news, you're not falling behind the competition, smash the subscribe button. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, as the developer notes read here, in Midnight, our primary goal for Unholy Deathknight is to deliver fantasy and gameplay that truly embody what it means to be a master of disease and raising the dead. They also wanted to deliver on the fantasy of nerfing you into the ground as soon as possible if you look remotely powerful at all. We found Festering Wound to be mechanically overbearing, and we decided to move away from it. So this right here is a very core thing to note. They are looking at core mechanics of classes and deciding whether it's you can stay, you can go. And the main issues with Festering Wound have been that you have to build it up on a target, and then you can't switch. You're kind of just stuck hitting that target, even if the situation isn't great. And so moving away from that means you're going to move away from that pain point and have a lot more playability. But it is going to need to be compensated, because that was the your main game mechanic that made Unholy feel unique. So let's see how they're planning on compensating you there. We're overhauling the core abilities of the spec to create a new rotation that interacts more deeply with your diseases and summoning powers. More ghoulies. That's my expectation right after reading that. More ghoulies. To deliver this vision, we've introduced a new type of summon called the Lesser Ghoul, placing it at the heart of Unholy's baseline rotation. Festering Strike now grants a buff that empowers your next couple of Scourge Strikes to summon a Lesser Ghoul. Instead of applying a debuff to a single enemy that needs to be spread and tracked throughout an encounter, we're also updating Army of the Dead to summon these new Lesser Ghouls and restoring it as Unholy's primary cooldown by reducing its cooldown to 1.5 minutes. This is likely because they're going to be removing a lot of spells and abilities on your class. This is going to be like the great pruning round 2.0 like Legion had, but Legion was still remarkable and spectacular. And if they're expecting to bring in new players with how fantasy steeped Midnight looks to be at the moment, simplifying the gameplay to give those new players a better experience is likely going to be a strong move in the long run. And obviously people have been complaining for a long time: ability bloat, complicated rotations, too many passives overlapping, too many modifiers, and this is Blizzard's first shot at addressing that. Now, as a PvP player, more pets sounds a bit concerning. So I do wonder, how many of these are they targetable? Are they going to be like shadowy apparitions maybe from a Shadow Priest, so they're not targetable? They don't have a health bar, so they're not occupying as much space on the screen. Also, if you have multiple Unholy Deathknights in a raid, is it just going to look like the Scourge is reborn and invading every single raid tier, or are these ghouls maybe only visible to the Death Knight? These are questions that I have, at least from just a visual standpoint. We recognize that simply having cool ways to summon armies of the dead doesn't necessarily create meaningful gameplay. That led us to design a new rune spending ability called Putrify, the third rotational partner alongside Festering Strike and Scourge Strike. With Putrify, you will sacrifice your oldest summoned Lesser Ghoul to explode and deal shadow damage to nearby enemies. So they're giving you like a rotational corpse explosion, which I think is a cool flavor. It's a cool fantasy. I actually really like the zombie PvP talent where the zombie slowly walks in and then starts to explode with a circle. I think that type of gameplay is actually like a really healthy type of crafting crowd control, and definitely does fit into the fantasy of it. So you're just going to have, it's almost like implosion, basically. A little bit of a slower ramping implosion from demonology on Unholy. We've intentionally placed putrify early in the specialization tree to enable further fun and meaningful interactions you can opt into. And for those wondering about targeting, don't worry, we've got you covered. Just press the button and enjoy the show as your lesser ghoul explodes spectacularly. Now, what can these ghouls be kited out of range? You know, like these ghouls going to just waddle very slowly? Are they going to leap at their target? Can they be kited? If you press this button and they're out of range of the target, do they explode and hit nothing? These are some concerns that I have. Could be concerns in PvE and PvP, because if the mobs get pulled by the tank right when you press the explosion, you don't get your damage, you'd probably be sad. Now that we've covered summoning, let's talk diseases. In Midnight, we're introducing a new single target disease called Dread Plague, which will work alongside your AoE disease, Virulent Plague. As with summoning, simply apply cool diseases isn't enough. We are redefining some core abilities and bringing runic power spenders like Death Coil and Epidemic into the mix. Scourge Strike will now cause your diseases to inflict an additional tick of their periodic damage at a percentage of their effectiveness, while your runic power spenders will extend their durations. Extending disease duration becomes important because we're also introducing a powerful disease consumption mechanic via a talent called Blight Burst. When talented into Blight Burst, the explosion effect of Putrify will consume a significant portion of your disease's remaining duration and deal that amount of damage instantly. By leveraging the concepts of Lesser Ghoul and Putrify, we aim to unify the Summoner and Master of Disease fantasies. We hope you'll find all of the other talents we introduced fun and engaging, especially with the new Apex talent, which we believe will fully immerse you in this redefinition of Unholy Deathknight. So you're more like a Necromancer. Very strong focus on Necromancer vibes here. Again, it's core mechanics of the ghouls getting pulled out of range of mobs, occupying space on the screen. Those are my main concerns for it as far as feedback, but it does sound like it's feeding into the fantasy quite a bit here for Unholy Deathknights. Apex talent, this is like the new capstone thing that makes your character really strong. Forbidden Knowledge. Army of the Dead siphons the power of Fallen, transforming Death Coil and Epidemic into Necrotic Coil and Graveyard for 15 seconds. Necrotic Coil unleashes a vortex of necrotic energy and bone, dealing physical damage up to 3 foes and shadow damage to all pierced enemies. 20 runic power and uses half of the global cooldown, so you're able to spam these much faster. In Graveyard, the dead erupt beneath all foes of Virulent Plague, dealing shadow damage to nearby enemies. 20 runic power and uses half the global cooldown. Now, I think the main advantage of this is that obviously you're getting a ton of extra AoE damage, which is going to be great in dungeon environments. But if they've got cool new animations, I think that's what a lot of players are looking forward to, is like what type of animations we saw in the Q&A. Like they talked about glyphs and transforming new spells. What are these going to look like? Are these going to have sick fantasy? Because just reading that sounds sick. A vortex of necrotic and bone flying at the target could be a really cool enhancement to Death Coil. And I've really liked this new style of ability design where you press a button or a cooldown, or you press the button, it transforms into a more powerful version or something. It feels like a combo hit from like a fighting game like Super Smash Brothers, where you spam the A button and you like a right punch, a left punch, then an uppercut. That type of combo feel has actually felt really nice throughout the War Within, and they're kind of doubling down on it with this type of iteration. So I think that seems pretty cool. Army of the Dead grants 20 to 40 runic power and causes your next 1 to 2 Scourge Strikes to summon a lesser ghoul. So you're going to get a ton of ghouls during that window if you didn't already have enough. When you putrify a lesser ghoul or summon one with Scourge Strike, the duration of Forbidden Knowledge is also increased. So you're going to have a big window where you can just keep extending this. It's almost like Metamorphosis, right? Like when you pop Metamorphosis, it empowers your 2 main abilities. When you pop Army of the Dead, it'll empower your 2 main spenders, and they're going to just be able to, you're going to be able to extend it as you continue in combat. And it seems like they want to move away from like the scripted gameplay of cooldowns and more so into this like overall sustain damage. So if you're able to sustain this over a long period of time, that could definitely be very enjoyable, likely very competitive. New talent Putrify, which is just decaying your oldest ghoul under your command over 2 seconds to have them explode for shadow damage. Lesser ghouls do not expire while decaying. Max 2 charges, 15-second recharge with a 1 rune cost. New talent Ancient Runes. Each rune consumed increases strength by 2% for 20 seconds, and multiple applications can overlap. So again, sustain, just overall damage, or character just feeling better more often, not just only in these 10-second windows. Festering Strike has been redesigned. Slash the enemy for physical damage and corrupt your weapon with Blight, causing your next 3 Scourge Strikes to summon a lesser ghoul. Scourge Strike has been redesigned, an unholy strike that deals shadow damage and erupts your plagues on the target, dealing their damage in additional time at 35% effectiveness. Spreads Virulent Plague on the target to a nearby enemy in a 30-yard range. So that's interesting. The mechanic they talked about above, where maintaining the duration of your dots, extending them, and then consuming them at the same time to make the target kind of feel the infection even more. Outbreak has been updated. It inflicts the target with Dread Plague and Virulent Plague. Dread Plague, a malicious plague that seeps into the soul of its host, dealing shadow damage over 15 seconds, but can only be on one host at a time. Virulent Plague, an infectious plague that spreads to all nearby enemies, dealing shadow damage over 15 seconds. New talent, Outnumber. Lesser ghouls serve you 4 seconds longer. New talent, March of Madness. Your lesser ghouls are just going to do 30% more damage. New talent, Reanimation. It's a capstone. When you putrify a lesser ghoul, it has a 100% chance to reanimate as a Magus of the Dead who hurls frostbolts and shadow bolts at your enemies. Additionally, the Magus of the Dead spells are increased by 25%. So again, raising an army like a necromancer. When these little ghouls fade, you can resurrect them and distort them into a new type of ghoulish fiend to attack your opponent. New talent, Unholy Devotion. Putrify now decays the lesser ghoul over 4 seconds and causes it to go into an unholy frenzy, increasing their attack speed and damage by 150% until they explode. I kind of think it should increase its movement speed too. That would help it make sure it stays on the target. Or maybe it just starts dashing, maybe it just starts leaping at the target over and over while it's attacking and you can't get away from it type of deal. And that could be like a strong fantasy for it also. New talent, Blighted. Scourge Strike. Critical strikes cause your Dread and Virulent Plague to inflict their damage at 50% effectiveness instead. New talent, Rapid Variant. When an enemy afflicted by your Dread Plague dies, it erupts, dealing shadow damage to nearby enemies and infects the enemy with the lowest health remaining with your plagues. This deals reduced damage beyond 5 targets. So trying to allow you to spread, like that single target dot is going to spread to other targets as it dies, so you don't have to spend a global reapplying it, and you can continue just smashing AoE. So trying to smooth out the rotation there. New talent, Festering Corruption. Runic Corruption now increases your rune regeneration rate by 125%. New talent, Scourging. Scourge Strike now instead causes your Dread and Virulent Plague to erupt for the damage they would inflict over 3 to 5 seconds at 35% effectiveness. New talent, Blightfall. All disease damage has been increased by 20%. And new talent, Putrid Echoes, replaces improved Death Coil. Putrify damage is increased by 50% and is now deals damage split between enemies it hits. Each additional enemy struck increases the damage of Putrify by 50%. So you're going to get massive ramping AoE. New talent, Reanimation, replaces Forbidden Knowledge. When you putrify a lesser ghoul, it has a 100% chance to reanimate as a Magus of the Dead who hurls frostbolts and shadow bolts. Additionally, the Magus of the Dead's damage, this looks like the same talent. This seems like just the same thing twice. Maybe somebody just copy pastes this twice, but new talent, Blight Burst. The explosion effect of Putrify consumes 6 seconds from your plagues on all enemies hit, dealing 100% of the damage they would deal over that time instantly. And Clawing Shadows has been redesigned. So this was like your ranged ability. Now a passive effect. Shadows guide your strikes, increasing the damage of Scourge Strike by 25% and causing it to grant you Clawing Shadows up to 4 times. For each stack of Clawing Shadows, your Scourge Strike chains to an additional enemy. Each subsequent chain deals 25% reduced damage. Honestly, I think in PvP is a big nerf. So the main advantage of Clawing Shadows was that it enabled your ability to be ranged. And obviously it was your shatter, right? You get to shatter your wounds off the target with it. Now the wounds don't exist. So now it's just going to be giving you extra melee damage, which means you're almost entirely stuck as doing melee damage as Unholy, which could have some issues, at least in PvP. Cleaving Strikes has been redesigned. Scourge Strike and Festering Strike just deal 10% more damage. Sudden Doom has been redesigned, which is when you proc free Death Coils. It's now Dread Plague has a 35% chance to exhilarate, making your next Death Coil an Epidemic cost no runic power and deal 35% increased damage. So it's just related to the Dread Plague dot, which I believe you can only have on one target. And also if it's a disease, is it dispellable? Is it easily reapplied? These are some potential issues, at least in PvP, especially if it has core mechanics like this tied to it. Doomed Bidding has been updated. Consuming Sudden Doom summons forth a lesser ghoul to assist you for 8 seconds. Move to the first gate. This proc will also grant you ghouls as well. That's really good. Harbinger of Doom has been updated. Sudden Doom triggers 30% more often and can accumulate 2 charges. So if you don't manage to get to it in time, you'll be able to build up 2 of them in a row. Super Strain has been updated. Dread Plague has a chance to grant 4 runic power, and it's no longer a capstone talent. Unholy Aura has been updated. Each ghoul you have under your command will grant you 0.5 to 1% mastery, and whenever you putrify a lesser ghoul, you will gain 3 to 5% haste for 15 seconds. I think Unholy Aura back in Warcraft, they also give you movement speed, so like maybe like an aura that gives movement speed to your pets could also be cool here. Reaping has been updated. Scourge Strike, Festering Strike, and Death Quill just do 30% more damage to enemies below 35% health. And they've done this with some other dog classes as well, so you're getting a lot more execute power, which is cool. Infected Claws has been updated. Ghouls have a chance to sicken foes, dealing shadow damage over 12 seconds. If this effect is reapplied, any remaining damage is going to be added to the new effect. Dark Transformation. This is a core ability. What's it going to do now? Causes an unholy blast around your permanent ghoul, dealing shadow damage to nearby enemies and evolving it into a monstrosity. Greatly empowering its abilities, Death Quill and Epidemic extend the duration of this effect by 1 second. So I've always wanted to be able to like customize the main DK ghoul. Like maybe he can transform into the big monstrosity, or he can transform into a lich, or he can transform into something else. You can like pick what he transforms into, like a warlock pet, and it has unique effects and things like that, but this looks like it's more the same. Summon Gargoyle has been redesigned. Army of the Dead will now summon a gargoyle as well into the battlefield for 25 seconds. It'll grant you 50 runic power, and the gargoyle will gain 1% increased damage for every 1 runic power you spend. It's a choice node with Raise Abomination though, so you have to choose between the Abomination or the Flying Gargoyle. That's going to be a tuning decision again as to which one ends up being better. Raise Abomination's being redesigned. Army of the Dead now only summons 4 lesser ghouls, but additionally raises an abomination that attacks enemies while emitting a disease cloud that deals plague damage over 30 seconds. Enemies with the disease cloud take 20% increased damage from your minions, and it's a choice node with Summon Gargoyle. So I'm wondering if they'll try and tune this in a way so that Gargoyle is like your best single target, and Abomination is your best AoE. So depending on if you want to do AoE or single target, that's how you'd flip between them to make that decision. Otherwise, one of them will just be better than the other in all situations. Army of the Dead now has a 1.5 minute cooldown down from 3 and will summon 8 lesser ghouls. Festering Scythe is now a capstone talent and has been updated. Festering Strike now follows up with Festering Scythe. So again, that transformation of your spell. So Festering Scythe slashes through all enemies in 14 yards in front of you. It's kind of similar to the Frost Scythe, dealing shadow damage and hastening all of your plagues hit to deal 35% faster for 20 seconds. So a lot of ability transformation, a lot of focus on the Necromancer side of this. Raise Dead and Festering Strike are now learned automatically, so they're no longer talents. Outbreak is no longer learned automatically, and now as the initial notes is something there's trading, I guess. Ebon Fever now causes diseases to deal 15% more damage over time and 75% of the duration, was 12% more damage over the time and half the duration. Death Quill and Epidemic now extend plagues by 3 seconds. Coil of Devastation now additionally increases Death Quill damage by 10%. Infliction of Sorrow now functions with Dread Plague. Morbidity is now a second talent gate, and these abilities have been removed. So Apocalypse, obviously anything related to bursting is going to be gone. Death Rot's gone. Decomposition is gone. Defile is also gone. Desecrate is gone. Eternal Agony is gone. Fester Might is gone. Improved Festering Strike, Legion of Souls, Pestilence, Plaguebringer, Rotten Touch, Soul Reaper, and Unholy Blight. Now, there are also class changes to Death Knight. You guys are going to be losing a little bit of defensive power. Seems like you're always losing defensive power when it comes to that. They're lowering your Death Strike healing, but they're buffing your Death and Decay damage by 130%. Lichborn is no longer going to reduce damage taken, and Sacrificial Pact has been removed. So a significant amount of defensive cooldowns from almost all classes are being removed, and I think this is because they're just pruning abilities, pruning defensives, so that healers now have the control of more of the situations in Mythic Plus or PvP, and so that they can change the pacing of the game. They've said in the healing post that they want one shot's gone, more sustained, kind of like your health slowly goes down over time and slowly comes back up, as opposed to you're dead, or you're at full HP. So the only way to do that is to get rid of a lot of the self-sustainability, also in line with their prunage that they're doing, and so they can improve the tuning of and healing and pacing of the game while also reducing ability count. So it seems bad initially on the front, but hopefully this is going to be like a necessary evil to get the game as a whole into a really good spot. But that's it for the initial update to Unholy DK. I am hoping to get on the alpha pretty soon. I believe the servers are down right now. Get on the alpha pretty soon, get gameplay. I'm going to run through some dungeons, maybe find some people to duel, something like that, just to see how the buttons feel, how the ghouls move, that type of deal. And we do it with as many of the specs as I can, because you guys know on my channel from live streaming, I play every spec in the game. And I may be branching out also into some more different versions of content. as well moving forward. So if you're interested in that, then make sure to hit the subscribe button. Thank you guys once again. Hope you guys enjoyed the update. What do you guys think of Midnight so far? Is this enough to get you back on the Unholy Deathknight or get into it for the first time? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next one.